And welcome everyone to the first panel here at the Alternative Energy Festival. This particular panel here will be addressing state and county energy policy, but we will never leave the focus of big wind and the undersea cable as a context when we address these issues. The panel will go on for about 45 minutes to an hour, and we'll be sure to allot time at the end, hopefully about 15 minutes, for the audience to participate in this discussion. I'd like to begin with introducing and also thanking our wonderful panel members for participating in this. On my far left here is Pat Geoghegan. Pat is on the board of the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, and the KIUC is a consumer-owned electric utility. Pat is also chair of Zero Waste Hawaii, and he's co-chair of Apollo Kauai, which is an energy alternative community group. To my immediate right is Doug McLeod, who is the Energy Commissioner for the County of Maui. His office's mission is to support development that is sensitive to the environment and also to create energy from renewable sources. To my immediate left is Robin Kay. Robin Kay has been opposing the big wind and undersea cable projects as a spokesperson for the Friends of Lanai, and he's been fighting the imposition of that project of the wind power plant on 25% of his island. The Friends of Lanai advocates for the use of decentralized distributed renewable energy sources, and Robin has been very tireless and very unyielding as a spokesperson for this group. To my far right is Henry Curtis, who since 1995 has been the executive director of Life of the Land, which at over 40 years old is one of the oldest environmental groups in Hawaii. Henry is an economist and an author who advocates for community-supported power. A lot of you in the audience attended our panels last year, and I thought a nice place to begin would be to look at how state and county energy policy has changed in the last year, and the panel members can address that issue through the eyes of their own groups.
You want me to start?
Hello, my name again is Pat Geoghegan. I am one of the elected directors of KIUC. KIUC is Kauai Island Utility Cooperative. I'm a director elected for a 3-year term. Every year we elect 3 new directors. That's one of the 7 principles of cooperatives, is having democratic control. So if you don't like the decisions we're making, you can get rid of 3 of us every year. A little bit about KIUC. 11 years ago, we were actually owned by Citizens Utility Company, which is a mainland corporation out of the East Coast. So any profits, any additional money that was being made was heading out there to their shareholders. And they were, at that point in time, they were ready to get rid of some of their businesses, Kauai Electric being one of them. So there was an opportunity. So in 1999, there was a group that got together, and it was spearheaded by just some business folks from the island, as well as a couple of our county council members, and they started looking into the cooperative model and could we buy it. And in 1999, how it worked out was they actually had a bidding process for it, and our price went up to $285 million to buy the company. Then, of course, that has to be approved by the PUC, and they came back and said, that's too much. You can't buy it, which is a good thing. So for the next 2-3 years, Citizens Utility continued to try to get rid of it. And this group of people came back with a bid of $215 million, which some will argue is still too much for the infrastructure we bought, but it was an agreed upon purchase price. So at that point in time, we became a cooperative. A little bit of the history, we used a lot of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. They were a great resource for us. Our financing, which the whole cooperative, the whole utility was purchased 100% financed, and that was through the Cooperative Financial Corporation, which focuses on cooperatives and financing things for cooperatives. So we bought it 10 years ago. We had absolutely zero equity. Our electric bills stayed exactly the same with a whole bunch of promises. So what have those promises provided? At this point in time, I'm happy to say that the member owners, which if you have a meter in your name, you can become a member just by signing a sheet of paper. So the member owners now own 25% of the utility after 10 years. In addition to that, with the money that we have made over what is required to run the cooperative, we have returned over $20 million to those same members. Now that $20 million goes out to you based on how much electricity you use. So being a relatively low electricity user, my share this past year was about $10. So that got put on my bill, but when you take a look at it, that does lower the cost per kilowatt. And we're not the highest in the nation. I know some people here who are, but we're very close to the highest. We're still higher than Oahu, but you know what? It helps getting that check back. So some of the things, we've got a lot of different initiatives going on. We are trying to get more diversified, obviously, going to alternative energy, get rid of fossil fuels as much as possible because that creates so much variability. And we are looking at trying to become more self-sustaining and keep more of that money on island. When you take a look at our budget, this next year's proposed budget is about $180 million. And that money is all going to come from our members. And unfortunately, about 97 to 100 million of that is going to be going off island for our fuel contracts. Whatever we can do to keep that money on island is something we want to do because that's going to have a tremendous impact on our community and our economy. So I'm happy to answer any questions that people have, but that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what's going on Kauai right now. Thank you.
In terms of things that have changed, I think there's a couple of key ones that I'll just highlight quickly because I know that my colleagues to the right know much more about them than I do. But clearly, we've slowed them down. That's, I think, one of the biggest changes. Their expectation for community opposition was totally wrong. I think they figured maybe Molokai would have a couple of dissenting voices, but nowhere near did they consider Aialoha Molokai's strength and voice, and for sure, they had no idea that Lanai people would be so upset and so loud. So I think that's had a major impact, and to your credit. This whole issue about LNG is changing the state's policy because it's not really a clean, renewable energy source, but it's so cheap. So everybody who wants clean energy is now faced with this opportunity to have lower prices, but maybe not so clean. So I think that's going to have an impact on state policy. This IRP process that's going on, my colleagues will talk about that, is a major change in state policy. It's supposed to be a system that encourages community review of our energy planning, and I think they'll talk about how well that's worked. The RFP that's coming out sometime will have a major impact on our policies and our energy solutions. And lastly, with the House reorganization, there's a new chair for the Energy Committee and a co-chair that will be a Republican for the first time in a while, who is a strong supporter of ocean-based energy and is a strong opponent of the cable. So with Cynthia Thielen as the vice chair and Chris Lee as chair, we may see some significant different directions from the legislature.
My name is Cloud, and I'm the Energy Commissioner for the County of Maui. The position's appointed by Mayor Arakawa, and generally, I think when we're talking today, you should assume it's more coming from the mayor than necessarily, the entire council. As you look around the state over the last year, you see a couple things. First, I know the cable is something of great interest to you, and when we were getting ready for this, I went back and looked at some of the master plans that the utility had put together. And they had targeted 2010 to issue the RFP for this cable. And now we're sitting here at the beginning of 2013. So I don't think there's much question that all the community opposition here and Lanai has had an effect. Robin's right. So today, you're on the cable, you're looking at a situation where the federal government is going to do this environmental impact statement. What they conclude, how long it takes, we don't have all those answers today. But realistically, you've got at least a year and a half, 2 years of environmental impact studies before you could really make a true go or no-go decision. At the state level, the cable is really driven by Oahu's desire to meet something called the 15% standard, the 20% standard. These are renewable portfolio standards, and they basically say what percentage of all the electricity that you sold that year came from renewables. They have their 15% number, their goal met probably for 2015 on Oahu. But as they look at how those numbers rise, what there really isn't yet is a clear plan B from the utility. What will they do to get this big chunk of renewable power that they're hoping to get from 400 megawatts of wind? And as all of you watch over the coming year, I think that, what you should keep an eye on is whether the utility starts to talk more openly about any sort of plan B. So that would be, I think, the key thing for you in terms of the cable. As far as what's going on generally around the islands, LNG is, really this hot topic right now. And it's a very interesting time. When I grew up and went to college, and all the experts, none of them would have said that the U.S. is going to be an oil exporter. And yet we're sitting here in 2013 at a time when the U.S. is, in fact, the mainland U.S., going to be exporting fuel. And there are a number of people that say that, yes, the environmental characteristics of LNG aren't that great, but at least it's American. And they make this argument that there is an advantage in terms of our security to be getting this from the mainland. The main issue that people have with LNG is the process of making all this cheap LNG has been fracking. And there are an awful lot of people who look at it and say that this is too good to be true, that there have to be some serious problems here with the process. But right now, the U.S. price, what they call the Henry Hub price for natural gas, is 1/3 of the Asian market price. And so there are these incredible economic forces that are at work trying to get more of that exported. And that's this temptation for us here in the islands, because we're always wrestling. We want renewable energy and we want cheap energy. And right now, it's very hard to get that mix. And if you're looking at the cost side of it, LNG pricing today is so low, it's almost difficult to comprehend. It's 40% reduction immediately in terms of the oil cost. But how long will these prices last? And is this all just a detour towards some actual self-sufficiency or a really high level of renewable energy? And so we're all wrestling with this. I work for Mayor Arakawa, and his long-term goal is that we keep moving toward 100% renewable energy, but that we do it in a way that really is sensitive to the costs. And so as far as LNG, I think we're relatively neutral on that, as long as everyone understands that it's just another fossil fuel. And on the cable itself, I think most people probably know the mayor is supportive of a cable that would run to Maui Island and is not supportive of a cable that would go to Molokai. And so that's been our position for really the last year or two, and to some extent it may have also slowed down the process. Yeah, really, he wants to see this go to Maui Island, and assuming enough generation can be brought online in Maui Island, no need to go further. And, we're all waiting for this famous RFP right now. So that's enough rambling from me, but I'd be happy, of course, to answer questions as we go through the day, and can give you some feel of what we've been doing on Maui as far as solar projects and renewable energy. Thanks.
Aloha, I'm Henry Curtis, Executive Director of Life of the Land. One of our early actions was we filed the 1971 lawsuit against the Navy for bombing Kaho'olawe, and we had the mayor of Maui join us as a co-complainant. And I have highlights of the environmental impact statement in our brochure, which is inside at the table of Punapono Alliance. The Navy in that EIS in 1972 said that 30 years of bombing had a net positive impact on the environment. And I have excerpts of that in our brochure. A few of the things that separate us from other environmental groups is that first, we think that people are part of the environment. And second, we don't come into communities unless we're invited in. So for example, when Kauai was discussing hydroelectric, we consulted with them about some of the ramifications of hydroelectric, but we did not step in and tell them what they should or should not be doing. This morning, I woke up early and then woke up again, but the first time we got up was about 4 a.m. and we were on the west side of the island, and it was amazing to see all the stars out, stars you never see on Oahu, stars overhead, meteors shooting through the sky, and off in the distant horizon, the glow of Oahu. Because Oahu sucks energy at an amazing rate. And you would just never see the stars like that on Oahu. Last year, I talked about the amount of money flowing out of Molokai, and I've quantified that a bit. Each year, Molokai exports $13 million to buy electricity and gasoline based on fossil fuel. So that is the target. If you produce your own energy on the island, you're keeping $13 million circulating within the local economy instead of exporting it to someone else. And so the question is, how do you, as an island, through forming your own energy co-op, through seeking grants, seeking government loans, begin taking control of your own energy so that you're not dependent on outsiders and that you're keeping money circulating, supporting the local economy? That would be the biggest hit to the utility, because right now the utility has faced the idea that for the last 6 years, each year demand has been dropping. And that has scared the heck out of the utility. As a business, you don't want to see the amount of revenue flowing into your coffers each year going down. A business tries to prosper by having increasing revenues. And yet the surest sign to tell the utility they're on the wrong path is to continue the downward trend of revenue going to them. At some point, they have to make a change. And I loved hearing Rob IAM speak at an energy meeting at the state capitol on, I guess it was Thursday, where he said that LNG, liquefied natural gas, is the solution. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is going to demand that all fossil fuel generators get overhauled by 2015 or 2016. And therefore, his idea is, well, if we replace our existing fossil fuel generators with liquefied natural gas generators, and we ship this in from the West Coast, which currently we can't do because A, there's no facilities on the West Coast that can export it, B, it has to be under the Jones Act on American shipping lines, built by Americans, powered by Americans, flagged by Americans, and the cost would be prohibitive. But suppose we could somehow find a port on the West Coast and bring in cheap labor from some other country to bring it to us, then we could somehow get ahead of the curve and get it all implemented before these EPA requirements kick in. Now, the slight problem with that is that Greg and I sit on the integrated resource planning process, where the utility is coming up with this short-term plan, and they have informed both of us in these meetings that liquefied natural gas cannot possibly occur in Hawaii before 2020. The EPA has these new reforms mandating it by 2015 or 2016, and therefore LNG cannot possibly be the solution. But here the senior vice president of Hawaiian Electric is telling the state legislators that yes, LNG is the only solution. So either HECO is lying to the community on this PUC mandated panel, or they're lying to the legislature, or one part of the utility is not talking to another part of the utility, and they have no clue where they're going. I suspect it's this latter case, that HECO has not been talking to HECO about HECO's own plans. And therefore they tell one community one thing, they tell another community another thing, and this request for proposal is getting bogged down not only because of these amazing groups like Aialoha Molokai, like Friends of Lanai, like this new West Molokai Community Association group, but it's also getting bogged down by the fact that they know which company they want to have it installed. But the RFP has to be drafted in such a way that it does not appear they're handing it to one company. And several companies already have people on these islands monitoring the RFP. And if it's drafted in such a way that it appears that it precludes other companies from winning, they're going to file suit. So the RFP has to somehow be drafted so it appears that everybody is a fair player bidding while only the chosen one wins. So the utility is in a real pickle of a place. And I understand Doug and Maui's position of wouldn't it be nice if the cable just went to Maui. But the problem is if it just goes to Maui, it goes through the channel between Molokai and Lanai. It goes through the South Molokai Reef, the longest fringing reef north of Australia, and it goes through the whale sanctuary. And there are no high voltage undersea cables going through that channel. And there are, according to federal agencies, not us, federal agencies, you can encase the cable to conceal, to have the electric field within the cable self-contained. But the cable will emit a magnetic field and an induced electrical field. Fish and different marine species flowing through the magnetic field will create an electrical field. And there are threatened and endangered marine species which are known to be impacted by the electric and magnetic fields. It affects their homing, their navigation, their communication, their awareness of prey, and their awareness of food. And there are no studies done on the long-term population effect of having such a cable. Therefore, federal agencies are also scrutinizing this proposed cable. So somehow, and then the beauty about it is, the PUC's consultant has said to the utility, what is your plan B if this doesn't work? And Robbie Alm was telling the legislature, well, not only don't we have a plan B, but everything on the books will fail to make us meet state requirements by 2020. So they lack even a complete plan A. So.
Perhaps, since several of you mentioned the RFP or request for proposals, we can talk about what role that plays in shaping energy policy in the future and what the current timeline is for the request for proposal, the RFP. The RFP has been mentioned a few times in our discussion, so I wanted to explain that it stands for Request for Proposal and how that plays a role in shaping the energy policy for the future here.
Hawaiian Electric, and I'm speaking for Hawaii, Maui, and the Big Island, the HECO companies as a whole, they have a requirement that they get 15% of their energy from renewable energy sources by 2015, which they're going to meet. Never mind the fact that the definition of renewable energy leaves a lot to desire, they're still going to meet it. They have a statutory requirement of getting 25% by 2020. And they haven't figured out how to do that yet. The cable would supposedly help them to achieve that. One of the things that happened, and this involves Maui, is that a third wind farm is being installed on Maui, and the wind farms simply have too much energy production to meet the Maui load. And therefore they're sort of relying on the idea that when there's a cable in place, wouldn't it be nifty to be able to transfer power to Oahu? Now, we've heard that one of the proposals is that 400 megawatts of power could be transferred to Oahu. We've pointed out that from a purely technical point of view, that the earthquake that happened off Kohala knocked out an initial 280 megawatts to Oahu, and that secondarily knocked off 140 megawatts. And the 420 in two components was enough to knock off the Oahu grid. You have 400 megawatts flowing through, and there's an undersea earthquake or a boat anchor snags the cable, and you knock it off. 400 megawatts go like that, you knock out the Oahu grid. Now, the beauty about this is, the real beauty is, HECO is the only utility in the nation that manages reliability on the grids. Throughout the mainland, it's regional reliability councils. There's 6 or 7 across the country. The legislature has passed a law last year that said the Public Utilities Commission can take over the reliability standard from the utility. They have created a panel of 24 people to help them create the guidelines on how to do it. Most of them are engineers and lawyers. I'm neither, but I'm on that panel. So the PUC will be taking over the reliability standard before 2020. Now, if the utility no longer handles reliability, but the PUC does, and you have this 400 megawatt cable coming to Oahu that can lose 400 megawatts like that, the utility would be able to say, whew, it's not us. The PUC is in charge of reliability on the cable. The blackout's their fault. So you have a whole nother layer of complications that the Public Utilities Commission will not only be overseeing this request for proposal, but they suddenly have the responsibility if something goes wrong.
One of the issues about the request for proposal is your fault. And that is because Castle and Cook worked a deal with First Wind to do half of the 400 megawatts. First Wind, as you all know, thank you for your power in this, could not get site control from Molokai Ranch. As a result of that, the PUC required Hawaiian Electric to put out for bid this request for proposal for 200 megawatts or more of any renewable energy that can reasonably serve Oahu. And that's what's coming down the pike. The one that they came out with as a draft required any cable to connect to Lanai. There was an outcry to that saying, you know, you're targeting one island, you can't do this, it's really wrong. So they changed it, and the second RFP said any cable bid must go to Lanai, or you must tell us why you're not going to Lanai. Now, we don't know what the third one is. It's currently at the PUC. We learned that. The PUC will then post it when they're comfortable with it. Apparently, they're going back and forth with HECO to work out the language. Once it's posted, the public will be able to comment on the RFP. But that RFP will give us an indication of what's in the works. For example, if somebody like Pattern Energy wants to do a 400 megawatts on Molokai and build a cable, that's how you'll know. The problem is that you won't know until the final bid is recommended to and approved by the PUC. So assuming that the RFP came out today, it would be about a year before you would know which bid is going to move forward.
And the transparency with this energy policy on the state level, are the communities on Molokai and Lanai being ignored in shaping this policy?
Doug, you want to go first?
We've been in a process with the utility for a while now, and it's called Integrated Resources Planning. And when it all started, I think we had some hopes that utility might be open to really looking at all the resources that go into making power, the water that gets used, the pollution, the cost. And one of the things that we've been pushing for a while is to say that if you're going to have this process, you should look at big wind and say, what can we put into the process so that there's input from these communities much earlier? One of the problems here is just how far along the process really got before people like you became aware of it. The problem was on Lanai, it's here on Molokai, and to a certain degree on Maui too. And that's really been our concern, is the way this process could have worked. They really would have come to the community, and there'd be projects that just died early because people asked, people listened, and people realized that in some places these projects are not acceptable. The IRP, the way it's actually played out, has been a huge disappointment to us at the county and presumably to most of the community groups that have tried to participate. Every time we've tried to really look at something different, we're getting a lot of resistance from the utility. So I guess just to kind of open that part, I would say that we really felt like this IRP thing could prevent the next big wind. But the way it's being done today, it's not going to happen.
The issue of transparency is really a simple one to address. There isn't any. It is a veiled, covered, secretive, private, confidential process on how your money is spent. It's that simple. I'll give you one quick example. All of you know some of this. When Larry Ellison purchased Murdoch's share of the island, and Murdoch owned 98% of the island. He didn't own, there's 1,000 homeowners on the island, but he got 98% of the island. As part of the sale, Ellison gave Murdoch the right to develop the wind mills on Lanai. That's in the sales agreement. We have been trying to find out what those terms are. Do they have a time limit? Do they have a kickoff date? Are they assignable? And the reason we're trying to find that out is because we believe that that is public policy information. If the state is making big wind on Lanai and Molokai the centerpiece of meeting the RPS, as Doug was talking about, then the ability, and if the PUC denied First Wind the ability to do windmills here because they couldn't demonstrate site control, we're saying that Murdoch doesn't own the island anymore. So he needs to demonstrate site control to prove that the state can still keep planning. However, Murdoch continues to say it's confidential, and the PUC says they're right. So we're at the stage now of exploring whether or not to take this to court. We've also filed some complaints with the Office of Information Practices, the Freedom of Information Act for the state. But the short answer to Greg's question is it's not transparent at all. You go to the PUC website and you don't know who the commissioners are, you don't know what their meeting rules are. You have to be, you try and find an attorney in this state who's an expert in the PUC who isn't working for a utility, and you send him to us. We'll hire him right away.
I wanted to ask the panelists that with more and more countries and more states turning away from industrial wind turbines because of their high cost to the ratepayers, their environmental devastation, their inefficiency, their exaggerated claims of carbon emissions, why is Hawaii embracing these industrial wind factories?
Hawaii has a love affair with monopolies, with large companies, and having a lack of competition. And that's why we have one school board when we have charter schools that are popping up, and yet it's across the board in all kinds of areas that the government and the utility likes favoring large, powerful corporations. They don't like diversity. And so that's why, for example, they're restricting the amount of solar that can be put on individual homes. They're not restricting the amount of new solar farms that can be put in with 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts, but they're restricting people who want to put in a 5 kW system, a minute system. They love large players, and the other reason they love large systems is for a hidden reason. If you have a large system, whether it's a wind farm, the wind can suddenly drop down in gusts, or speed up and the wind farm can shut down because the wind becomes too intense. Or if you have a large solar farm where the clouds come over and there's a sudden drop and then there's a sudden rise in output, that requires the utility to be able to have a lot of generators that are functioning far below their efficiency level, operating low, so they can quickly speed up to adjust for this sudden change in their wind and solar. So having this enables the fossil fuel generators to operate so that you're not only, the wind and the solar require the fossil fuel. And they love that because then they hide the cost of having these fossil fuel plants being able to jump up and down. Many of these fossil fuel plants are 30, 40, 50 years old. There are some of the generators that were installed before statehood, like Honolulu Power Plant next to Aloha Tower. The generators were built in 1954 and 57. They were not designed to go up and down. And therefore, you need all of this utility management, control, regulation, all these engineers employed to figure out how to handle integration of these large systems. And all of the costs associated with this have been secret. I have signed 30 confidentiality agreements with the utility so that I can see confidential business information. I can see who has bid on projects that have lost, what the hidden cost factors are. I can't tell, even behind all the secrecy walls, what the true cost is to maintain the fossil fuel generators to offset these large wind and solar facilities. That is transparency hidden behind walls and walls of secrecy, and I have not even been able to determine if the utility knows what these total costs are. I don't think they know themselves, and they love that. They love having the complexity. It boggles the mind That's why they like big wind. It adds to the complexity. It adds to the engineers needed that would not be needed for simpler solutions.
One other quick reason that big wind was chosen. Lingle and Murdoch had an easy fix, they thought. They had a landowner who was willing to give his land, 25% of the land, to hold 174 windmills. That's in their PEIS. I'm not making that up. And Murdoch would have stood at the term sheet prices that were subsequently negotiated, would have stood to make almost $150 million a year in revenue selling the wind to the state, or to HECO, rather. On top of that, his investment of $1 billion, 65% of that comes back to him in a tax credit and a tax grant. So it's an easy one. That's why big wind. It's money.
I actually want to talk a little bit about wind because it's finally time for me to start disagreeing with these guys a little bit. You have a good cause here, and sometimes in the name of a good cause, there's a tendency to look at the negatives of wind. There's a real simple reason why we want wind in Maui County. It's real simple. Our peak energy load is at night. It's just that simple. As much as I like solar power, as much as it is easier to do solar power, there is no solar power that's going to replace any of the utility generation that's powering that peak. So if you want to talk about making this energy with renewable sources, you've got to talk about either solar plus storage or other alternatives plus storage, or we say wind is a good thing to have here in Maui County. Now that doesn't mean huge wind farms to serve Oahu, and one of the things that the mayor really disliked about the original proposal was none of that power was going to be used or available for any of you on Molokai. So you can do a good wind project and a bad wind project. And it is true also, like Henry's suggesting, that in the past people have come in and kind of made these promises like wind power is going to lower your electric bill. And it hasn't really been true because they kind of fudged the math and ignored what needed to be done to keep these fossil plants online. However, if you think about an island like yours, it's a very manageable scale, and you could design from scratch a system that would be fossil, designed to integrate with wind. And frankly, in today's dollars, that is cheaper than solar plus storage. So I just wanted to really kind of draw a distinction between wind power and say that, well, wind power on a certain scale and wind power at more of a Molokai scale. And just keep, this idea open in your mind that wind has some huge advantages. Every time you feel the wind after dark, that's power potential you're just not getting from solar. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought.
I'm going to interject a few thoughts. One, we don't believe that wind is either good or bad. Every energy source has positive and negative political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental impacts. Every energy system will harm the planet in some way. Second, the number one time that wind blows is at the early morning. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. is the most intense period for wind generally on these islands. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the utility refuses to buy any wind under any condition for any reason from any of the wind farms. The most intense hours that energy is used within the state on each island is between 6 and 8 p.m. The number one renewable energy source from 6 to 8 p.m. are solar water heaters. You take the sun from the day, you heat your water, you have hot water in the evening. We should be mandating the state should finance and subsidize and support having solar water heaters on every building within the state. And if you have photovoltaic to reduce the daytime energy levels and solar water heaters to reduce the nighttime levels, I think that's far more effective than wind. I'd like to point out the flags that are around here. You see the green square that we're in, the purple green square. This is the footprint of a single wind turbine. What would happen is bulldozers would come in and lower the level down, I don't know, 20 feet, 30 feet, dig a huge hole the size of this ribbon. They would put the base of the turbine in, and then they would pour concrete in to secure it. Now, concrete is one of the great greenhouse gas emitters in the process, because you have to take boulders, basically, and use either coal or gas or oil to pulverize these big rocks into little pebbles and then ship them from Oahu to Lanai or Molokai, and then build stronger roads, and then pave roads to the wind farm, and then pour all of this concrete into the hole at one time. And it takes, I think, 28 cement trucks at one time to fill one hole. So it's tremendous. And if you see the flag, there's one set of flags that go that way, and they just seem to disappear over the horizon. That is the height of one wind turbine. That it would then be uprighted to fill this massive hole. And you need the hole this big in order to secure the turbine so the wind doesn't knock it over, basically. Because if you have something spinning in high wind, you don't want the power of it to just twist it around. So the amount of concrete that you pour into the hole might be the single largest amount of greenhouse gases produced through the entire wind industry. The second largest might be the massive amounts of concrete, paving, whatever you need to put the roads to get to the wind turbine. And the utility always says the only greenhouse gases you need to compare is what comes out of a smokestack versus what happens when the propellers turn. And therefore, they look at the wrong set of values.
Thank you. And Henry, I'd like to thank you for a couple of things. KIUC as a process, we are looking at things as a portfolio approach. So we haven't totally said wind no. Right now we can't do it partially because of the shear waters and an endangered species, but it is something that we're keeping out there as a potential. And I'd like to go back to something that was in your report that you issued last year, and I think it was towards the back, but to me one of the most important things in that report really had to do with self-determination. And it was the statement that each island should determine what is best for that island and should be able to remain independent, both for our security as well as for our financial and economic well-being. And luckily, Kauai is far enough and there's a deep enough channel that we don't have to worry about a cable. So that's a good thing. One other thing I'd like to talk about just briefly, and that has to do with the discussion up here that was on transparency. Now, I'm not going to be one who tells you that the cooperative model is perfect. I'm on the board. I fought the board for a number of years before I got on it because I did not like some of the decisions that were being made, how they were being made. Being on the board, we have tried to put some proposals forward. All of our board meetings are open for members to come to. The committee meetings are not. Some of us would like to see those open, but of course it takes 5 votes. We haven't got that yet. Some of us would like to have our meetings broadcast on the local Ho'ike program. We haven't got the votes for that yet. So there are areas where we can become more transparent. But an interesting thing, Henry also talked about the hydro projects that KIUC was looking at. About a year and a half ago, before I was on the board had made some decisions. Part of that was to include the federal government in looking at the hydro process, and it was kind of a shady way that it came around. I was against the process, although I am for hydro. But how it went around was a little bit of a concern. It concerned many of the members. One of the provisions that's in our bylaws as being a co-op is that any decision that is made by the cooperative board of directors can be put up for a recall vote. Now that recall vote takes a total of, I believe, 250 signatures. If you can get those 250 signatures from the members, which the opposition did, and they ended up having to hold a special meeting and a special vote on that one decision that was made by the board. Now, the decision did not have enough votes to vote it down, so it's continued, but I tell you, that was a wake-up call for the board of directors who was there about the process of going about doing some things. Unfortunately, I don't think the lesson was learned real well because they rolled out smart meters in much the same way they did the hydro. So we're working at trying to get the processes to be a little bit better. But the good part is, at least within the cooperative model, if you feel things are being done in private and there's enough of you, you can at least recall the decision and have more discussion on that. Doesn't guarantee it's going to change, but at least that is an opportunity within the co-op model.
Pat, I wanted to ask you, several dozen people on Molokai who have wanted to install solar with tie-ins to the grid have been told that they cannot because there's a cap that's usually set at around 15%. Yet on Kauai, you're approaching 50% penetration of solar, 50% penetration. What does that say about the HECO and MECO cap?
I'll tell you that I was relieved to see that HECO, the PUC, made HECO lighten up some of the requirements lately, which was a good thing. And some of that may have to do with the fact that we do have circuits that are over 15%. And basically, KIUC has not disallowed anybody from putting any solar on. Any individual can do that. We are more concerned when you're starting to talk about the large solar farms, where those are located. Those may have additional requirements, like they may also have to pay for another substation, if they want to do that for a profit. But none of our members have had any problem interconnecting. I myself did it. I have a small wind turbine. It's a 1.8. It's a SkyStream 3.7 on a 40-foot tower, just a 12-foot wingspan. It provides about half of my electricity. I'm in a relatively windy area. I've got 6 solar panels that I put on my roof, and all I did is made sure that they had the specifications. They came out, changed the meter, and made sure I had the proper shutoffs to protect their people. So it's been very open, and I think that's the way it should be. Now, needless to say, we are going to be learning a lot with the amount of penetration that we are putting on. We've got a 6 megawatt, the largest in the state, that just went online this December. We are building 2 12 megawatt plants. The solar is going to make up about a total 30% of our generation within the next 2 years. We are installing batteries to monitor that, so there's additional requirements that are occurring, but we are trying to push the grid and be as flexible as possible.
I'd like to open up questions from the community that you'd like to share with the panel members. I'll come down and bring the microphone to you. Anyone have questions for our panelists? Yep, over here.
With all due respect, Doug, you're saying that it's important for the windmills to become in effect because of lack of power from solar at night. And it was mentioned the hours that the wind is most active. Those are also the hours of your REM sleep. I spoke with a professor, a researcher, someone who does the studies on low frequency noise, infrasound, and she strongly suggested and asked me to heed this information, and I ask you to take this into strong consideration. If you or anybody you know lives in a low frequency noise contaminated home, move. If you cannot move, whatever you do, do not sleep in that home. Because vibroacoustic disease affects you stronger when you're living in an environment Vibroacoustic disease is something different from wind turbine syndrome. You can move away from wind turbine syndrome. You can recuperate. Vibroacoustic disease, you cannot. And it's not about the hearing level of noise. Your heart is affected. It's your body's way of trying to deal with that constant vibration. Your heart, your lungs, your brain, your soft organs are hardened and thickened because of this constant vibration. You guys have wind turbines going already. I'd like to know, was a study done on the health of the people in that environment prior to these things being put up? Who is monitoring their health currently? These things will take effect, not just on that person, but on the community. It's going to take effect on the state. Who's going to help pay for people when they don't have jobs anymore because they are too sick to work? Their health care. Who's going to pay for the extra counselors they're going to need in school to deal with the aggression of the children? Who's going to pay for the special education teachers for the children who have cognitive thinking problems? This is a statewide problem. Whether you put windmills on Oahu or you put windmills over on Maui. Who's going to pay for all of that? When people start dying because of heart attacks, because of cancer in their lungs from the cysts that develop from the hardening, is the state going to pay for that? With whose money? The taxpayers? When I die, because I live up there in Mauna Loa, I've got a front row seat. When I die, are my family members on the other islands going to be paying for my death with their tax money? How do you justify that? It can't be. The cable. Please give me a break. The cable. Did you know that over 50% of all cancer research is done in the ocean and through our reefs? What would you rather have? And I ask this over and over and nobody answers me. A cable, high voltage cable, or a cure for cancer? Would you sleep at night knowing that you had cancer? Molokai has a lot of people with cancer. And we're supposed to say, oh yeah, just destroy the ocean, destroy our fish, destroy all the research. These things are being used for a positive, something that can last a lifetime, not 20 years, not 40 years. How do you justify that? If you eradicate that, 500 meters is what they wanted to check out for the environmental issue. 500 meters, not on either side of the cable, but 500 meters. That's what they said was the only area that needed to be inspected for laying that cable. Please. Those cables, they attract sharks. Sharks are known to bite the cables. Is that because they think it's food? Or is that because they're being aggressive? Either way, who's going to protect the people in the water from hungry or aggressive sharks? Who's going to implement that? Who's going to pay for that? When whales start beating on the shores, how are you going to save that? What equipment is going to be implemented on all these islands to get those whales safely back where they belong. 500 meters. What if the whales don't migrate? What if they have breeding in cold water and the calves die? How is it going to affect the milk of the mothers? All these unknown issues, and they want to push it through. For you to be up here and even start saying that wind turbines, I'm sorry, I know, Henry, we're not all against wind turbines. Personally, I am against wind turbines. They kill people before they are even constructed. How do you sleep at night with that? The magnets that are being made, the toxic waste of lake. The farmers in China cannot even grow things. Their cows died. They are dying of cancer. Their teeth are falling out, and their babies are being born with soft bone disease. How do we justify that? I'd like an answer.
One of the things that was really interesting to me talking earlier was the group from Big Island talking about geothermal had exactly the same concerns about health effects of these ultra low frequency noises. They're not noises, they're really, just emissions. And that's probably one of the real cutting edge areas. In the past, one of your questions is what was looked at. I can tell you what the county does. These wind farms on Maui are privately owned. But we have done several of them in terms of approving permitting and going out there. And really, it has been more primitive than maybe it should have been. It has been essentially you draw a circle, you make sure there's a certain level of notice to everyone that's within that circle. And then beyond that, we've gotten studies from consultants. They have looked at things like light flicker and, the daytime effects, but the last one I saw for Ulapalakua really didn't have an evaluation of ultra low frequency, noise specifically, and it's kind of an interesting question. In general, this hasn't been the concern of, if this was on Maui Island, I would hear more concerns about nighttime visual impact, that one of the growing issues on Maui is these red strobe lights and the fact that this is really all night in some places. And I'm not trying to make light of the health issues on ultra low frequency noise, but that hasn't risen to the same level of concern as some of these other things. But again, back to your actual question, is that really something that's been looked at hard? Not really. I mean, not at our level, and I can't speak for the state or the feds, but that has not been a concern. And when I say that we like wind, there's very different things, and I think we're trying to say that here on Molokai, if you want a solution that is an island solution, a distributed solution, then there are a bunch of trade-offs. And right now, I appreciate what you're saying about the health impact of wind, but I would also say that the health impacts of an oil spill, the impacts to the reef are also bad. So it's not like we're choosing between one option that's just clearly good and the other one that's so clearly bad. And then talking about your point on EMF, I'm kind of like Henry in the sense we have to always sign these agreements, but I think I can tell you that the county has privately expressed some concerns about that specific issue. And it's not so much whales in our minds to start with. Whales tend to be higher up in the ocean, but there is some pretty solid research that seems to suggest that, and you mentioned sharks, that's an excellent example, sharks and rays and some of these other skates that really do react to those levels of EMF. And frankly, we've told the PUC that the level of the HECO's summary of the research in this area does not seem fair. They seem to be saying that, there's nothing to worry about. But there does seem to be some pretty good research that indicates that these species are reacting to the fields that are created. And we would say that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that there wouldn't be a big impact. So that's my first take at an answer, and I'm going to give it to Henry here.
First, I want to say thank you. Thank you. You have raised an issue that does not get nearly enough play. If you look at geothermal, for an example, when geothermal went in, they said, we're going to look at the health impacts. Pono Alliance has been able, after 20 years, to finally force the issue of looking at health impacts. As a general rule, we know that fossil fuel have negative health impacts, but we are not looking at the health impacts associated with renewable energy. Biofuel, for example, there's a great push, why don't we use all kinds of eucalyptus? Well, eucalyptus is a particular type of woody tree that emits a certain chemical into the atmosphere that affects low-level ozone levels and affects human health. If you start using that as a major crop worldwide, you have enormous health impacts. Wind farms rely on powerful magnets. The magnets are trace minerals that come from China. China extracts them from the ground, puts them on the top of the ground, pours acid on them to separate the heavy metals from the rest of the earth material. There are entire lakes of acid in China that are affecting local farmers so that we can have magnets, so we can produce renewable energy, so we don't rely on fossil fuel. It is criminal not to look at these different impacts. Life of the Land has written a proposed bill at the state legislature this year that would direct the PUC to look at the impacts associated with each type of renewable energy. And the bill specifically goes through and lists each type of renewable energy and what the probable impacts may be. Not to say that we have put out the definitive list, but we're merely showing that there are significant health impacts associated with each type of energy source. And it is very, very important that we begin analyzing that. And so thank you for the question.
Alarm, Malachi. I'm sure that the people of Malachi cannot be convinced about putting a wind farm. No matter how much we rationalize and analyze this issue, the facts still remain. We do not want this on Molokai. We know the negative impact. And we know more or less why they want to put the wind farm on Molokai. What I don't understand is that solar, the sun, National Geographic mentioned in one of the books, it said that the sun is so large that if it's hollow, you could put 100 Earth in there. And so you can imagine how powerful the sun is, solar. And what I don't understand is that why they don't consider solar, because there is no winter months in Hawaii. There's no obstruction. There's no snow. Okay. It is the greatest. The book says, this is written by National Geographic. It mentioned in the book says that it also has, it also controls the wind. Now, we know that wind can be inconsistent. If there's no wind, the vanes don't spin. If the vanes don't spin, what does the turbine do? Okay. it's not that we don't want to help our home and recognize that they have energy crisis. Okay. I said once that Maui, Lanai, Kauai is ours, literally speaking. They belong to us. And if they should have a problem or a need, we really should help. But in this case, how can we help or give something that we don't have? And Molokai is just a tiny dot in the Pacific. I'm not saying that wind farm is a bad thing, but if it was in a proper zoning, because we have them in northern and southern California, and it furnished the whole city. But as for Molokai, this is an insane thinking. Over and over again, the people of Molokai have informed the government, we do not want this here. Because it's not that we're concerned about, well, let me see. Well, I'm losing my train of thought now. It's not that we don't want to help, really. People here are willing to give out from their shirt and everything. I'm just sorry about this problem. It's driving me. It really drives me bananas. When I think of this wind farm issue, I feel terrible. I feel really terrible. I don't want it. I don't want it on my backyard. I live in Mauna Loa, and I really, truly don't want it in my backyard. Thank you.
You probably haven't gone down to Waikiki recently and watched all the open doors as certain stores catering to certain visitors turn up the air conditioner full speed and pour cold air out onto the sidewalk as a lure to get people into their stores. Think of the future. They could say, we put 400-foot wind towers on Molokai to lure you into our store so we could waste energy. Oahu wastes so much energy. If you go up to either Leahi, Diamond Head, and look out at Waikiki, or to the top parking lot at Dole Cannery, and look out in Iwalei, you can see massive roof space with nothing on it. 3 stores were just recently built. The Costco, the Home Depot, and Lowe's all have flat roofs. Costco put solar on. Home Depot put nothing on. Lowe's, I think, has, or some of the new ones have a few skylights. Maybe not Lowe's, but City Mill has some skylights. But the point is, if you look out at that vast area of flat roofs in an industrial setting with direct sunlight pouring down, and in the Costco parking lot is a major transmission substation, the Iwalei substation, one of the substations that has been proposed as a possible site for where the cable would come and connect to the Oahu grid. So it's a major substation that could take a lot of power, and it could take the power from the neighboring commercial stores with these flat roofs, and they have not installed it. So the question is, why would you consider Molokai when Oahu has the potential and doesn't? And I'm not advocating this, but Lila Berg, sitting over there, comes from Aina Haina. And if you look at Diamond Head, Black Point is a particularly rich enclave at Diamond Head. Onshore at Black Point, and then coming offshore and traveling along the coast all the way to Haunama Bay, and then coming back onshore at Haunama Bay, that is a prime wind spot where you could put 10 times as many turbines as being proposed for Lanai and Molokai combined. No one has suggested that because why would you despoil Aina Haina's view planes when Lanai and Molokai can be easily exploited?
Hello. And that brings up the question I'm going to ask. When I was in business for over 35 years, one of the things that we used to say was, lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. It seems to me that Oahu is terrible at planning anything. They talk on the news now about putting in 2 more high-rises over on the Kaneohe side. Excuse me, where is the water going to come from for your high-rises? Where is the electricity going to come from? For goodness sakes, you have 700, 800 people on one little, 800,000, people on one little bitty island. And you go and you stretch your fingers out and say, gimme, 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 gimme. And the people of Hawaii do not see any type of planning going on over there at all. There should be a moratorium on building. Somebody needs to figure out that we cannot sustain. That island's going to go into the water for all of the buildings they want to put on it. Tourism is wonderful. It is our industry. But we need to manage it better. We cannot continue to deplete our resources. Molokai is in a drought. We finally got some rain. The deer are no longer eating everybody's yards, okay? They have some food of their own. But one of my concerns is our island is poor. We depend on the deer to feed our people. These big wind turbines, nobody can tell me how it's going to affect our livestock. Okay, if we don't have deer, our people don't eat. If we can't fish in the ocean because of some cable, our people don't eat. Okay, is Oahu gonna come feed us? We have enough trouble getting Maui to send us a Social Security administrator over here. We've been begging for one. You know what they tell you to do? Go to Maui. Drive to Maui. Excuse me, you guys gonna build me a road to drive to Maui? To me, that would make more sense than this wind power. We need planning. We need to demand that the powers that be, the people that are in charge, start planning before they do all of this stuff. You tell me you're going to stop building on Oahu, and maybe I'll worry about your electricity problem. But for now, Molokai has problems of its own.
There used to be a term for that when one country had the people and they needed resources from another country. I think it was called colonization. And I want to thank, is it the correct pronunciation, the Quanchen, for coming here and showing us how Pattern has abused them. I think it's really important. One of the things you said is that even if you're not currently using a site that is historic, that is part of your people, there's a special value of that place. One of the traits of Hawaii is that we have had an amazing group of different kinds of people who have come here. The native people, the native Hawaiians. We've also had other groups pouring through here, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Filipinos. We need to begin looking at the sites of the proposed wind farms and saying who has had some site within there that has some special meaning in their history. We have begun looking at that from the Native Hawaiian perspective, which is very important because this land is theirs. We also need to know whether there are other cultures who have special sites that maybe they don't remember right now that are within those areas. And we need to begin also, as some groups are, like the West Molokai Association, beginning to track the endangered species, the threatened species, GPS, whatever, to document what is where. Because the more sites that we can locate within where the proposed wind farm is, the more we are laying claim to the area and the more difficulties anybody will be able to come in and deal with that area. And the idea, for example, of wind-deer interactions, WDI, you can come up with a new acronym, WDI, and say, how are you dealing with it? And I'm sure that nobody has ever analyzed WDI on the mainland. And by making those issues and other issues associated with the wind farm, we are adding complexities. Whereas if you simply put solar on a roof, you're not really affecting much. So I think solar is the great winner in this.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. We'll take on this end. Good to see you, Lila.
Thank you so much for being here, all of you. And just a short little correction, Henry. I'm from Molokai. I just sleep on Oahu. Okay. So actually, the question is for you, Pat. You know, for years, I've been listening to the reasons why the turbines are not good, what the alternatives are from being the inside of government. We've looked at ways to mitigate the procedures and processes, educate the community, you know, rally the organizations. I think we need to ask different questions. We've been asking the question to who is behind this? How did this get started? Why is there such a hook in this particular initiative? I guess what I'd like to ask you, because Kauai has been very courageous over the years, and you've had your issues, yeah, and so we can learn, and you're here for a reason. How might the conversation and the discussion and the problem solving now move from whether or not it should be wind, where the windmill should be, to how can we become really independent on this island? Because I think the train is moving. This is in process already. We have to just completely interrupt the process. And I think it's what Kauai has done. You've created your own system. So how can we move the conversation here to that next level? And then after that conversation gets going, what are the things that we need to be paying attention to so that we can actually succeed at creating an independent entity?
That's a tough one to answer, to say the least, because it definitely is a process. And I mean, it took Kauai, 3 to 4 years of hard work to get to where we were, and we had a willing seller. I'm not sure that if Molokai created their own energy cooperative, what that would do to the bigger picture of the wind farm and the cable. I do think it should be a viable option for this island. I mean, the fact that, I, as a member, can vote for people, can go to the meetings and voice my opinion and at least let them know what I have is a certain amount of empowerment. And even though I'm on the board, all of my decisions aren't followed. But at least I can force that dialogue. And if enough of us can force that dialogue, we can create some of the future we want, at least drive it in the right direction. So however you can go about empowering yourselves more, I would grasp that. And as I said, Kauai entered into it with zero money down, so the mechanisms are out there if the economies are right. And how to take the bigger issue of the wind turbines, and You know, like I said, I really appreciated Henry's statement in his analysis of the energy options for the island, and the key being self-sustaining. I mean, what does happen if a cable is here and it's being relied upon by Oahu and it goes down? You know, is your grid able to deal with that loss of power? That doesn't make Oahu more self-sustaining, you know. So, I mean, I think there's better benefit in us all becoming as self-sustaining on energy, food issues, you know, all of that stuff, than it is to continue to rely on any outside entity. And of course, that's coming from somebody from Kauai who is the kingdom that could not be had. You know, so there's a certain amount of that mentality that is still on our island. We're going to do it our way. Darn it, even if it costs more, we're going to do it our way. You know, and it is not, you know, a seamless process. I mean, like I said, we've had issues about the hydro. People who want hydro just did not like the way the co-op was going. And so that's what they were protesting. Similar with the smart meters, you know. That decision was made before I was there, and I went in as a board member and said, hey, we're a co-op. We're supposed to be here for our members. If you're not going to change that decision because of what members are saying, at least give them an option not to have one in their home. You know, don't subject them to the potential health hazards that may or may not be there. If they feel it's there, I don't want to be part of a group that is putting that inconvenience and that stress on people. So I think there are options, whether a cooperative model is the way or not, depends on what people want. It depends on what people are willing to do and go after. But I do think that there is a certain amount of security in having it, and a certain amount of you know, ownership and pride that can be done with that. So, thank you.
I have a question for the panel. It seems to me, I'm going to start with a statement. It seems to me that the problem with any large business coming in and putting up an industrial-sized plant is that there's a profit motive more than there is any concern for the community. So I think the solution is decentralization. The problem with agro-business or any form of large business is that there's a profit motive. My question to the panel is, if we focus our energies on stopping the cable, which has tremendous ecological implications, if we could stop the cable, in your opinion, would it stop this, the wind farm idea from happening anywhere else except on Oahu, where it might do the most good?
I think you'll get a couple of answers on that. I think Doug has advocated to have the cable to Maui. And because for a number of reasons they have more power than they can use, they can sell it. I don't hear as much community opposition from Maui Island as certainly we have on Molokai and Lanai. For us on Lanai, we're in a really peculiar situation right now because we have a man who owns the island. What a concept today. Who owns 98% of the island, who seems willing to spend millions and millions of dollars to make Lanai self-sustaining. And part of that, we think, will be in energy. He's talking about desal, he's talking about pumped hydro, he's talking about all kinds of things to make the island self-sufficient. So the answer for us is we don't want the cable, we don't want big wind, we do want to be energy self-sufficient. But that also creates another set of problems. If we desal and produce water on our island, then development could happen and we could become like Ka'anapali. So half full, half empty for us.
As far as what would happen if the cable is just abandoned, it would, I think, get rid of any discussion on this island about such a large project immediately. You know, you don't need anywhere near that size for your needs here on the island. And you do have, you know, from a technical perspective, getting this island either 100% renewable or just more self-sufficient, say 2/3 renewable. It's all very achievable. It's a question of, where the funds are going to come, and then you get into choosing the technologies, because wind. Well, I should just say that when we all talk about the price of renewable energy, it's a surprisingly difficult thing because there are these enormous tax credits that just distort all of this. But if you took what the experts would say today, they would still say that for your own island, at this moment in time, wind looks a little cheaper than solar plus a storage. And you could still decide. Each island can make their own call about the right mix of resources. As far as what would happen on Maui, this cable is not a key part of Maui County's policy. It's more making the best of what is coming out of Oahu. And we do think that a cable to Maui makes a lot more sense than anything to Molokai or Lanai. But would we, if the cable just went away, we still want to be moving towards 100% renewable. And for us, it's the utility that's the obstacle here. The cable is really more an Oahu issue that's just landed on our doorstep. The fundamental problem we have on Maui right now, as far as Maui Island, is we really can't add new projects because the utility is essentially saying we don't need the power. And Henry mentioned how old some of the units were on Oahu, and I can top them on that because we have 1947, 1948, these very old steam turbines in Kahului. So our emphasis as far as the county has really been to try to push the utility to literally take things offline. One of the reasons we haven't made as much progress as far as keeping the costs under control is that on Maui, even though we've added essentially 100 megawatts of renewable energy, the utility has never taken a single plant offline. So that's our issue. And the cable offers us something of a solution to that. But if the cable goes away, we're right back on the main issue, which is, freeing up capacity so that we can bring on more renewable resources. Thank you.
I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone on the panel and everyone in our community
answer that?
for. But first, of course, Henry, we would not want to.
I'm sorry, you asked all 4 panel members, and I wanted a chance to quickly respond. First, nothing is ever dead. Geothermal, they thought they had stopped the cable. Puna Pono Alliance is now fighting a new cable 20 years later. Nothing dies, so that is not the stop this iteration, it will come back. Second, we did not intervene in the Maui wind farm or the North Shore Oahu wind farms because we intervened when were invited in and nobody was objecting to those wind farms. So we don't, as a policy, just put our foot in our mouth and step into someone else's battle. Third, if the cable goes from Oahu to Maui, we would not oppose it for the Maui wind farm issue unless there was opposition on Maui. But if it goes through the Lanai-Molokai channel, we would step in immediately because that's critical. Second, finally, I want to thank the one benefit about the cable I do want to praise and thank. The benefit is it has made Molokai residents far more aware on energy issues, and that is a positive step in moving towards your self-sufficiency. So I want to thank them and thank you.
Thank you, Henry, and thank the panel. They'll be here throughout the day, so you can have some opportunities to interact with them. Thank you.